Hey guys, this is Dave with Audio In, and if you've been keeping up with my channel, you'll know that the Kefine Delci has been my favorite IM under $100 for a while now, and even in my recent review of the Titan S2, I felt like the Delci was just a little closer to my tuning preference, and in the end, the Delci retained its spot as my top pick under $100. Well, now the Delci has some very serious competition, and it just so happens to be its brother. We have a lot to talk about, so let's get started. In the box of the IEMs and cable, they've also included a pretty decent case and a small assortment of ear tips, but that's not it, because this new AE version of the Delci also includes an extra set of tuning nozzles. We have the silver set of nozzles that comes pre-installed, and then there is this gold set of nozzles that brings just a slightly different flavor of tuning, which we will talk more about in the sound breakdown. It's currently priced at $69, although the website suggests that the regular price is $89. So I guess we'll see if the price ever actually jumps up to $89. It has a single dynamic driver configuration like the original, and the driver is housed in this all metal shell, which is pretty much identical to the original Delci as far as the shape and the size. But of course, they've gone with this silver color scheme, which I actually think I like better than the original dark gray. I do think the design is still quite simple, but at the same time, it does kind of appeal to my minimalist side. The fit and comfort are excellent, just like the original. It probably helps that the shells are a little on the smaller side. And I should say, I have not been using the included ear tips because I almost always instinctively switch over to either the Velvet tips or the W1s or the SNS tips. That being said, the included tips do work just fine for me as far as me being able to achieve a good seal and a comfortable fit. Cable is also pretty decent. It's your basic 2-pin cable, and it's terminated in a 3.5. It's nothing really that out of the ordinary for this price point. It is maybe a little on the thin side, so it doesn't feel quite as robust as the cable that came with the original, but it's not a big deal at all because it's otherwise perfectly adequate, and it's actually even a little softer and easier to manage than the old cable. And I do think it looks great with the IEMs as well. Okay, let's move on to the sound. So the Delci AE does bring something a little different to the table because now it gives you two different tuning options. The silver nozzle, which comes pre-installed, takes a similar approach to the original, which has more of a neutral presentation, although it is kind of riding that line between neutral and V-shape because it is a little more engaging and it does have a little more bass presence that can kind of push it into that fun territory. And then you have the gold nozzle, which is these right here, and these bring those bass levels down just a little, and then it adds some energy in the upper mids and treble. So the gold nozzles are going to have a somewhat bright presentation, while the silver is going to be a little more relaxed. And of the two, I don't think it's any surprise that I preferred the silver nozzles over the gold, because the gold was just a little too bright for me. We'll go ahead and talk about the silver nozzles first, because it has so many of the same characteristics that made me fall in love with the original, but it also has some of the flaws as well. And one of those flaws is that it has just a little too much energy in the low mids. And I do like that that brings some richness and weight into its presentation. However, it does also introduce a little bit of bass bleed, which is affecting low mid clarity, and things can sound just a little unnatural in the lower half of its tuning. Bass dynamics, however, are very good, and it has nice extension as well. And despite the issues with the bass bleed, I do still feel like its overall bass quality is very good, especially considering its price. And I really do feel like it's better than most other IEMs under $100. But the mid-range is where things really start to come into focus. And I honestly don't know if there are any other IEMs probably up to the 100 or even 130 bucks, aside from maybe the A-Full Explorer, that can produce mids as naturally as the Delci, and then now the Delci AE. But here's the thing, the Delci AE actually brings just a little more mid-range detail into the picture. So you have a very natural reproduction of vocals and instruments, but now with a little more resolvability and clarity. So the characteristic that made the original Delci such a standout to me is now improved just a little more with the Delci AE. And the same goes for the treble as well. Its general tuning approach with the treble is very similar to the original in that it has a very natural presentation. However, it does have just a little bit of an edge to it, but it doesn't ever really reach the point of becoming fatiguing. As a matter of fact, the AE brings even more refinement to it. So it's just a touch more resolving than the original. It has a little more detail, and it also has a slightly more open presentation with slightly better instrument separation and imaging. But in summary, the AE, while still being very similar to its tuning compared with the original, brings just a little more refinement and a slightly better technical performance as well into the picture with the silver nozzle, again, which is my favorite of the two. And now the gold nozzle takes a fairly different approach in that instead of the presentation having a smoother, more relaxed tonality, with the energy being overall fairly balanced, with maybe just a slight tilt or emphasis on the lower half of the tuning. Instead, it takes that energy and basically shifts it the other direction towards the top half of the tuning, so that the presentation is just a little brighter and maybe even a little more transparent. So the focus with this tuning is going to be more on vocals and less on the bass. And it definitely does have a more vocal forward presentation. Plus, I would even say it's even a little more resolving and even more open sounding than the silver nozzles. And what's interesting is that even though the vocals are just a little more forward than the silver nozzles, I still don't really feel like they're too forward in the mix. And what's great to my ears anyways is that the mid-range still sounds very natural overall. So the Delci AE with the gold nozzle is going to appeal to listeners that are looking for more of that vocal forward presentation as opposed to a more laid back presentation or relaxed and warm presentation, again, which is my preference. Now, if I had one nitpick, and this is for both the gold and silver nozzles, that is, I do wish there was a little more treble extension. And again, this is really a nitpick because it does so many other things really, really well. But I would have liked to hear just a little more air up top. So then what does all of that mean in terms of where the Delci AE stands compared to the rest of the competition? Well, I've already tried to describe the improvements over the original, and the original was already my favorite IEM under $100. So it only stands to reason that the Delci AE now jumps into that top spot. And I'm not just referring to dynamic driver IEMs, although my opinion is that this is the best implementation of a single dynamic driver that I've heard under $100. But in terms of tuning, I also feel like it is simply the best IEM regardless of the driver configuration. So in terms of tuning only, which I prioritize over technical performance, the Delci AE is now my top IEM under or even just around the $100 price point. I like it more than the Explorer. I like it more than the EA 500, Titan S2, the RA2. And if you throw the original Delci in, that's basically my top 5 right there, around $100. So again, in terms of tuning alone, my top 5 would look basically like this, now that we have the Delci AE in the mix. Number 1 is the Delci AE, then following closely behind is the original Delci. Number 3 would be the AFOL Explorer. Number 4 would be the Titan S2. And then number 5 would be the EA 500. And here's kind of an attempted explanation for that ranking. I prefer the Delci AE over the Explorer because while I do feel like the Explorer is tuned very well, I actually prefer the added mid-range energy and bass energy in the Delci AE's tuning. And the reason I put the Titan S2 behind the Delci AE and Explorer is because while I do think it is one of the best V-shaped tuned IEMs around $100, its upper mid-range is just a smidge too forward for me. And both the Delci AE and Explorer have a little more of a natural, little more of a smoother presentation in general, and it comes just a little closer to my tuning preference. So hopefully that reasoning makes a little bit of sense to you. That is, again, that's based on my preference, my tuning preference. Bottom line though, is that the Delci AE now takes the top spot as my new favorite IEM under or even a little over $100. So of course that means it definitely gets my recommendation. And if I was just starting out in this hobby, this is exactly where I would start. So that concludes my review of the Kefine Delci AE. Thanks so much for taking the time to watch. If you like my content, please take a second and hit that subscribe button. Also, if you would please like this video, please share this video. I hope you guys have an awesome day.